All right, folks, welcome. I'm going to hand this off now. We're about a minute before 10. Maybe we'll just give it one more minute, but I want to thank all of you for being here. We are lucky to be joined by a whole bunch of folks today. So, and you'll hear different shout outs throughout this presentation, but I want to thank each and every one of you for joining us. My hope is that today's discussion sparks conversation beyond just this press conference and helps us as a community start to reckon with some of the issues that we face, especially as it relates to educating our children. So with that thought and that, time being close to 10 now, I want to hand it off to Dr. Sarah Silverman, who is the chair of A+ Schools Board of Directors, for some opening remarks. Sarah?
Thanks so much, James. I really appreciate that. And I want to actually start with a general note of gratitude, both to you and the team at A+, but also to the dozens of organizations that have come together in various forms to form coalitions of support over the course of the last 8 months to do what I think is an extraordinary amount of work for the community. I think this may be our first ever virtual announcement of the report to the community, which is a reflection of what the special year we had this year. And I say that actually without irony. I think although it came with some really incredible challenges and hardships, it's been special in that so many members of the community have come together in support of the fundamental needs of the community. And so I think much like our report to the community, which every year in some ways highlights the distance that we have to grow, it also highlights some really, really extraordinary and special stories. So I want to start by just saying thank you to many of you who are partners on the call today, and to the leadership at A+ for navigating together through the course of this year. I think together with Pittsburgh Public Schools, making things just that much easier for families going through really, really challenging times. Thank you all, reflecting again James's sentiment, thank you all for making the time to join us for this virtual convening around the report to the community. We're very excited about what has been pulled together this year. I think with feedback from folks like you and many members of the community, we've every year worked to try to create something that is increasingly readable and telling a more thorough narrative about what really happens. About a decade and a half ago, A+ was founded with the idea that we could bring some radical transparency and a degree of accountability through unbiased sharing of data. And we continue to think that it's critical to be honest about where things are and where things stand, and that it's important to set ambitious goals for growth and improvement. But what we've learned over the course of the last decade and a half or so is that sometimes just the data doesn't tell a sufficient story, and it certainly doesn't tell a complete story, no matter what we do, as well as the voices of folks who are actually members of families and members of communities or school communities and individuals who are working every day in the best interest of students. And I think one of the things that we've learned is that by and large, people are all trying to work together in the best interest of students and families around them. And what we want to do is try to contribute to that as much as we can. So to that end, last year, we made an extra effort to try to do more to tell the story of extraordinary effort and success. Sometimes successes go unsung because they take extraordinary effort to make progress that isn't quite meeting the ambitious goal that we might initially set, but they are nevertheless incredible stories and stories that matter a lot because they're the first step in long journeys to success. So we think that last year and this year the same, we've been able to tell stories of growth, stories of increased hope, more pathways to success for students and for communities. And I think you'll find that as we go through today's discussion, that we found even more wonderful stories and things that demonstrate that, well, certainly there are ways that we can continue to grow and improve as a school district, that there's a lot of actually very positive things happening in Pittsburgh Public Schools. Many thanks to the educators that are working closely with students every day, to the school leaders who, despite the challenges that they face, keep coming back and staying committed to making progress however they can. So with that, I want to turn it over to James and to Amy on the A+ team to, I think, start with our Change Makers Award, speaking of celebrating successes, and then dig into this year's report to the community. Thank you both.
Great. Thank you so much, Sarah. I'm just going to do a brief overview of our agenda before we get to our Change Makers and our Education Leadership Awards. So you've just heard from our board chair. We'll do our Education Leadership. We'll talk a little bit about what's inside this report. So just to give you a little orientation about what's in it. Really dig into some of the challenges of systemic inequity. I'll say more about that when we get there. And then tell the stories of a couple of schools and one big program that our district runs where things are changing that we wanted to highlight this year. And finally, from some of the leaders in our community around education, and then close out with some remarks and questions and answers. So with that, I'm gonna move forward. Just before we do this, I just want to orient folks to who A+ Schools is. We're an organization with a mission to make sure every child, and especially Black and Brown children in Pittsburgh, get the high quality education they deserve. We do this 3 ways: by listening and learning to the students, parents, and educators in our schools to hear what their challenges and successes are. We then collaborate and create with partners, both to support those needs, whether those needs are in school or out of school. And then we share and connect and try and tell the stories of what's working, providing this key information as we do through this report to the community, to stakeholders, and hope through that sharing of information, and also by doing the work together, that we can make change that works for our kids. Just so you know, when we talk about equity, right, and we believe that all schools need to provide an equitable education, we mean providing each student what they need to reach and exceed a shared standard of success. That equity is not equal. It means each school should get something different based on the needs of students. And we think of this in terms of 4 big strategies, right? The people, the teachers and principals, the resources, actually the dollars that are spent and how they're spent, the supports that we can provide students so that they can reach their full potential, whether that's students with visual impairments or our medically fragile students. How do we make sure that they have all the supports they need so that they can fully engage in education? And then opportunities from sports to arts and music to world languages that help expand the horizons of our students. So with that little brief orientation into who we are, I want to thank our sponsors who helped make this report possible. Without them, we wouldn't have been able to publish this year. So I really just want to say thank you to those who donated to sponsor this report, and to whom, most of whom you see here, we've also partnered with to try and support families throughout this epidemic. Really, these are organizations, people, institutions that are doing good work every day on behalf of children. And so I just want to say thank you to them. And then to our team. We've been blessed with an incredible team that put this book together. So Faith Shantz, who's our editor, has been doing this since we've started as an organization. We have a great data consultant in Sean Caulfield, Gita Macholka, who is our director of communications and marketing, who project managed this, and under the circumstances we were in, created something wonderful. Our designer at A to Z to Communications, Ryan Thompson, who took our ideas and turned them into something beautiful that we hope will help translate the data into something more meaningful and accessible for folks. And to our entire team, Amy, Nicole, Graham, Krista, Brandy, I couldn't do this work without you. At PPS, I want to thank Dr. Hamlet, Dr. Dwyer, and Deb Friss, who worked with us to provide the data that we need. Deb, especially, I can't thank you enough for, in this challenging year, taking the time to work with us to provide as up-to-date data as we could. And to Susan Chersky in the Office of Communications, who reviewed some of this and provided some helpful comments at PPS and insight into some of the things that were going on. I also want to thank our student artists. And the cover, this beautiful cover that you've seen, was done by a 3rd grader at Pittsburgh, Allegheny. And so thank you to Poppy H, third grader there. The artwork on page 27 of the book, The Lion King with his baby cubs, was created by Jada M, a second grader at Pittsburgh Morrow. And the artwork on the back cover that you see here on this slide, Untitled Ink, was created by Jolie R, an eighth grader at Pittsburgh Brookline. So thank you to our student artists. And finally, thank you to our charter school teams as well, who created, who helped us get the data we needed so that we could provide you this report. So with that, and I know that was a little bit longer introduction before we could get to our change makers, I want to hand it over to Amy White of A+ Schools, who can tell you a little bit more about some incredible teachers in our schools. Amy?
Yes, thank you so much, James. So every year we have students from our Team Block Network nominate educators in their lives that are making a big difference for them and that they feel are excellent educators for them. And so this year we had the most nominations that we've ever had, but it got narrowed down to 3 individuals who are our winners that we're recognizing today. So first we have Miss Asia Davis. Miss Davis is an English language arts teacher for 7th and 8th graders at Pittsburgh Manchester Pre-K to 8. She has been a full-time teacher since 2012. She's always willing to go above and beyond to do what's best for her students, and she always makes sure to bring her bright, positive attitude to every situation. In her nomination, a student shared, she really cares for her students. She doesn't play any games, and she will definitely push you. Ms. Davis, we appreciate all you do for your students and for being a force that inspires greatness. Thank you for being here today. Next, we have Ms. Terry Setnick. Ms. Setnick is an English language arts teacher at Pittsburgh Arsenal 6 to 8. She has been at Arsenal since 1988 and has been teaching for 33 years. In addition to her teaching role, she has served as a reading interventionist and has coached basketball, softball, swimming, and cheerleading. Her dad grew up in Lawrenceville, so she enjoys teaching in a neighborhood that she feels a personal connection to. In her nomination, a student shared, she is a great teacher because she goes step by step and takes her time to help us learn. I learned a lot of things in her class. Ms. Setnick, we appreciate your years of dedication and for doing all you can to support students. And last but not least, we have Mrs. Yolanda Wilkins. Mrs. Wilkins is an English language arts teacher at Pittsburgh Starrett 6 to 8. She is a graduate of the Pittsburgh Public Schools, and she began her teaching journey with the district in 2002. Her belief is that all students can and will learn in her classroom. She is dedicated to providing a safe, nurturing, respectful, and risk-taking environment while providing quality instruction to her students. She believes all of the above will allow her students to thrive in order for them to achieve their dreams academically and personally. In her nomination, a student shared, she honestly has a big heart and wants to see everyone live up to their dreams and see everyone succeed in life for everything they want to do. She's the one who got me most prepared for high school. Mrs. Wilkins, we appreciate your ongoing commitment to students and for being a loving educator in their lives. So thank you all for all that you do. We're so excited to celebrate and recognize you today. And for all of the other educators out there doing amazing work, especially in these times. So thank you, everyone.
Yeah, thank you. Were we together, we'd be, yeah, exactly. There'd be a huge round of applause for everyone here. And, you know, I can't say thank you enough for continuing to do the work you do with our kids every day. We know that online learning presents its own sets of challenges. And all educators in Pittsburgh Public Schools have stepped up to that challenge. And so we're appreciative of you, but especially these 3 who our students found, spoke so eloquently about. So thank you to you all. All right, so let's get quickly into what's in the report this year. So you may be wondering, without test data, when our schools closed on March 13th, PSSA and Keystone tests weren't given. You may be wondering, so why do a report at all? Well, we felt it was important and necessary to take this opportunity to dig deeper about what's working in our schools, where specifically inequities lie in the systems, and what families should know about the options they have, both from a process and a standpoint. So this year, as a team, we worked on updating the design to making it more accessible, and we hope that our efforts will be rewarded with a focus on what we can do to help improve schools so that all children are learning. And what's in it, you'll find bright spots, right, within our Rising Up stories, but also in the executive summary, a system analysis that you can find in our executive summary, in the high school opportunity and high school deep dive page that we provide. On the school choices side, we have everything from what to look for in a pre-K classroom. And I want to give a big shout out to Trying Together and their team for their help in putting that together. But also to the folks at PPS and the Magnet office whose resources online and who we've worked with on school choice fairs in the past to really help us understand the process so that we can translate that and hopefully help parents navigate their options in the school system. And finally, in providing the kind of transparency that you've come to know us for in taking school data and presenting it in a way that we hope helps you see from a larger perspective all of the inputs and ways in which that go into a school from a data standpoint. So quickly just want to orient you to what's different this year that we're offering that we didn't offer in the past. So at the top of the page, we've added these icons as a way to orient the reader to to what the school offers, what type of school it is, and the offerings it has. We've added teacher demographics. We recognize we'll talk a little bit about the research around matching teacher and student demographics matters. It's not the only thing that matters quality of instruction, but it does have an impact. And then we also added national board certification this year. Important to us because we know teachers in national board certification on average are getting better than average achievement results with their students. And so wanted to highlight the fact that these teachers exist in our schools and to also raise up what it means to be nationally board certified for people to understand. We believe reporting on these things in the coming years will help us track these research-backed ways that I just mentioned that can support growth in student achievement. Additionally, we decided to display the suspension rates a little bit differently. This year we're going to display it overall, broken down by subgroup. We're also providing additional information about chronic absence. So in the past, we provided rates of chronic absence broken by the number of students missing 10% or more. This year, thanks to the district's partnership, we're able to add the number of students missing 20% or more of the school year. We also are able to provide a more graphical view of school demographics than we were in the past, which we think will just help people orient themselves more quickly to in the school and what the demographics might be. Finally, at the bottom of the page, you'll see achievement data, as we said, is an average of 3 years, 2017 to 2019. And you're able to look at the changes from 3rd to 5th grade in a school. We believe this creates a little bit more stability and accuracy because you have a larger cohort that you're looking at. You'll note that moreover, we note that the switch schools are education partnership schools. Education partnerships provide school supplies to teachers and students across our region, but we felt it was important for folks to know which schools are partnership schools. And if you have an opportunity to support their efforts with a donation of either supplies or dollars, we'd encourage you to do so because they are really doing the hard work of making sure kids have what they need, especially in this time of COVID, to be able to learn successfully from home. So really want to thank Education Partnership for all they do and highlight the work where they're working in our schools. Finally, in our high schools, in addition to the Keystone data that we provide, you'll see that we're adding CTE enrollment, the career and technical education. Why? Well, there's some research that shows that participation in career and technical education programs leads to higher graduation rates and greater participation in high school. So we wanted to at least highlight where students are participating in those programs and also to start to talk about the ways in which career and technical education is much different today than what it was maybe when we were growing up and we thought of it as vocational education. Much more highly skilled, much more greater connection to college credits in the state. And so as we've learned more about this through our work at Perry High School, we wanted to highlight this as well. And the great work that Angela Mike is doing in the CTE office and all of the CTE teachers are doing throughout our district. Okay. So with that orientation, I wanted to take a moment to just talk about our analysis of a system some of you on this call have heard me speak about over the past few years. In reading Isabel Wilkerson's new book, Caste, The Origins of Our Discontent, I finally found a vocabulary for the inherent inequity that I see across our systems. Ms. Wilkerson builds on earlier research to accurately describe social and cultural norms of our society as a caste system. In her words, it's the operating code for the economic, political, and social interaction in the United States. The multiple pandemics we're facing of COVID, political violence, and a fight for justice at some level all illustrate how caste permeates our lives and undermines the creed that we have of equality for all in this country. And yet, I'm still hopeful. Hopeful that the truth of what's happening in our country and in our schools will set us free. The outcomes we see can be dramatically different because in some schools they are. I'm hopeful that we can get this pandemic under control because I've watched with pride as young people marched for justice and voted in record numbers, wearing masks and social distancing and pushing our leaders to do better. Finding a new path forward that disrupts the current hierarchy and begins to help all of our children, but especially Black and brown children, live out their true potential is bigger than any one organization or person, but I do believe it's solvable. Our schools play a critical role in that, but it's also, they are part and parcel of a larger set of systems that work to support our kids. And so when we talk about how we can make change, you know, we're going to show you through the stories that we wrote is that it's about relationships. It's about authentic engagement with students and being who you are as a teacher or as a family. And it's about linking families to supports if they need them, or to adding them into your community as assets, because we know there's so many things our families can bring to a school if they are invited and welcomed in. So, and finally, that we focus really hard on literacy and making sure that all students are learning to read and supporting our educators to be able to do that successfully. So if I think about those key components, I'm hopeful that we can change, right? So when we talk about systemic inequities, what we're really saying is that every system is perfectly designed to get the results they get, right? This is an adage, a maxim of quality improvement that folks in healthcare, folks in manufacturing have known for years. And it's something that our school system, Dr. Hamlin and others have talked about for the past few years as well. I mean, and if our goal is to get everyone college and career ready, then the data I'm showing you on this slide, the differences in outcomes for testing, both for the SAT reading and math benchmark and our PSSA test, are indicative of where students are in terms of their path. But that's not the only story, right? You can also look at the reports that the Pennsylvania Human Rights Commission just put out, and I recommend you would, and other data that kind of can tell you a story of what's happening in our schools. And it is right now unjust and inequitable. But when you start to take a systems view of the school, right? So that rather than looking at like who's to blame, but really what's the system in which these outcomes come about, you start to understand, one, these results are not inevitable by any means, right? Structure helps create them. And we're going to walk through a structural analysis in the hopes that you can start to see the challenges that our school system face, some of which are internal to the system, but many of which are outside. And then you also start to look for, okay, so if the system has challenges, who are those that are eschewing those challenges to get in moving past the trends and get great results? And these folks are bright spots. These are the clues for how the system can change to people, the students, the families, and educators better, right? So let's start to look at these challenges a little bit more deeply, right? So first, we're going to start with the challenges of segregated neighborhoods, right? 14 out of 50 of our regular schools, right? The schools that we put data pages on in PPS are highly segregated. And we define that as 75% or more of the student population is Black. And this is a deep and historic fact of neighborhoods in our community, right? The map you see behind this big fact is from the 1930s, and the pink areas were deemed at the time to be places where federal housing loan guarantees wouldn't apply, so-called redlining. While illegal now, the legacy of the practice lives on in neighborhoods that are deeply divided along racial and socioeconomic lines and that concentrate poverty in certain areas. Those concentrated poverty areas are also line up in some ways with the feeder patterns for our schools. Not saying completely, but in some ways they do. And that creates highly segregated schools, which tend to have higher rates of chronic absence and suspensions, tend to have higher teacher turnover, and tend to have leadership turnover as well. The challenge is, while having a school close to you, close to where you live is desirable, those schools, right, should have the same level of stability and instructional experience as do schools in better resource neighborhoods. It's not something we haven't talked about before. We have, but it's something that as we start to think about the context in larger terms, becomes much more apparent and clear. Another challenge, gaps in cultural affinity and knowledge of the teaching for, right? While PPS has about three times more teachers of color compared to state averages, which is about 94 in the state of Pennsylvania, about 94% of our teachers are white, according to research from Research for Action. Still know in a system that is 70% students of color, that mismatch means that there are cultural gaps and assumptions that are ingrained so deeply as to seem like common sense. Again, I will refer you to Isabel's book Cast to understand some of how that assumptions work. It's not to say that those gaps between culture can't be bridged. They're bridged every day, and we're going to talk about that and how some schools are doing that. In fact, there are classrooms in schools that we don't talk about in our book this year where we know that's happening. We also know that this is a problem that the district and the union have recognized and have implemented both the parent-to-teacher program and the teacher year in an attempt to diversify our teacher pipeline. In a partnership with Point Park and Carlow University, PPS paraprofessionals are working to get the education they need to become classroom teachers, and we think that this trend is a good one for creating better cultural matches between our teachers and our students. Again, the cultural mismatch also has been shown to be a contributor to parents and families' status feeling discriminated against. As W.E.B. Du Bois eloquently put it in 1903, how does it feel to be a problem? We know that the power dynamics of schools and parents is a contributing factor to why 1 in 3 Black kindergartners miss over 10% or nearly a month of school a year. This is last year's data, the 2019-2020 data that we're showing you right now. Additionally, we know the teacher recommendations to parents play a strong role in gifted identification. And what we see is as poverty increases in our schools, gifted identification decreases. What further exacerbates this problem is state policy that treats IQ as something fixed, where there's a huge body of research that shows IQ is adjustable. These two factors, right? Recommendations being given to parents for gifted evaluation and the sort of criteria upon which students are identified to get services and extra supports lead to what we see as a great disparity with only 16% of the total students identified in grades K to 8 as gifted being Black. Again, this is not preordained. Schools like Schiller and Manchester Academic Charter School have worked to drive chronic absence to 0. They do that through a relentless engagement of parents, or that they do whatever they can to make sure students get to school and that there are engaging programs and that students are known. In addition, we see schools like Dilworth that are providing gifted programming within the school rather than having students take a bus. That's complicated to do at the district level, but we think we should be learning from these examples so that we can then better change in our schools where it's a chronic absence challenge. Additionally, the cultural mismatch has another angle where research out of North Carolina shows that students tend to receive harsher discipline from white teachers. Black students tend to receive harsher discipline from white teachers than Black teachers. And we see in Pittsburgh, nearly 8 out of 10 students suspended last year were Black. The devastating impact of those, which starts as suspensions, leads to arrests, and the Black Girls Equity Alliance and Gwen's Girls have done an incredible job speaking to the impact and the disparities between education and arrests. And we just want to say thank you to them for their work and for the continued efforts that they make to change policy so that we can reduce these disparities. And so when you start to take these factors into account, and then you add on top of that, and this other challenge of the ever-changing Pittsburgh housing market, as the availability and location of affordable housing changes throughout the county, we see enrollments in Pittsburgh public schools decline. These declines put pressure on the system as resources become spread out buildings, leading to reduction of offerings, as many of the costs within our school system are fixed. Then leads to reduction in quality and further erosion of enrollment as families, Black and brown and white, opt out PPS for the suburbs, for private schools, and for charters. These challenges all work together in such a way so as to create high schools where a system, where we see a high school fairly stratified and segregated. Race becomes predictive of AP enrollment and the number of AP classes offered in a building, right? So we see here that over the majority of students in our AP courses are white, in a school system that is majority of color. We also see as the number of Black students increases in a school, the number of AP offerings decreases. I will make a note though, that Obama is an outlier in that it provides access to IB courses for a higher number of students and a school that is much higher of a population of Black students. Moreover, we see at our selective magnet schools and in Alderdice, a neighborhood that serves Squirrel Hill, Shadyside, Greenfield, and Hazelwood, a pattern of lower enrollments of students in poverty and with disabilities. We see this higher concentration of students in our neighborhood high schools, but because of a declining enrollments, those schools with greater challenges typically have had historically fewer resources, though to this administration's credit, that's starting to change. How we construct the choice for students matters, right? So CAPA, Obama, and SciTech all have entrance requirements and the ability to get students out for a variety of reasons, including academic, before graduation. Thus, we've designed a system that perpetuates itself as the children that graduate go out into the world having had less opportunities, greater in-school challenges, and less support than white students from well-resourced homes. Is it any wonder then that the racial wealth gap continues to grow, that unemployment continues to be much higher in our African-American community here in Pittsburgh, as these societal challenges of American caste system play themselves out in schools? So how do we improve, right? When looking at these challenges, we believe that there are solutions. It becomes clear that our youth and families have to be at the center of our inquiry, rather than the institutions that were built to support them. Right? We've learned this lesson over the past 8 months, and Sarah spoke to this a little bit, in working across sectors to support families impacted by the economic downturn of the COVID epidemic. We've joined together with over 70 organizations in what we're calling the Pittsburgh Learning Collaborative to try and address a variety of issues, from everything from access to nutritious food, to technology, to out of school and at-home learning supports. We're trying to get better coordinated with the school and system, and to leverage our resources to be a support to families. So schools, which do so much, right, which provide food, which make sure kids are vaccinated, can focus more on teaching and learning. We created a family hotline to families, create links so that their needs are at the center of the challenges and problems that we solve, right? So we learn, not only are we trying to make sure that the families have what they need through the family hotline, but we're also trying to learn from that and focus our attention and our research and our efforts and resources, areas that they're saying need to be addressed in order for their students to learn at high levels. And so an example of this kind of collaborative approach that we're taking is happening at Perry High School, right? I mentioned before the Imagine PPS process, or if I didn't, I was supposed to mention the Imagine PPS process that's trying to address the inequities that we see in our high school, with a focus on Westinghouse, Perry, and Mallions high schools. There are incredible people working in every one of these schools. And what we're trying to do, working in partnership with the district, with the Buell Foundation, One Northside, the PFT, the Promise, CCAC, and a host of other organizations and educators in the building, is support those educators and students to drive the change for what they want to see in their schools. And folks are stepping up to create a vision at Perry that you can read about in our Rising Up stories in the book, that builds on its history and creates programming that will support every child to belong and thrive. And as part of the work that we're doing at Perry, we also are looking at best practices both nationally and locally to see what we can do to build on those lessons learned from other schools. Which takes me to our Rising Up stories. We started this process last year, as Sarah mentioned in her opening remarks, and we've been able to continue it this year thanks to the participation of some really amazing people. So I want to thank Dr. Tamara Sanders Woods and the Colfax team, Dr. Carol Barone Martin and the ECE team, the Early Childhood Education team, the Fulton ECE team, and Trying Together for their support in shaping the stories around early childhood, to Jennifer McNamara and the Southbrook team, and Robert Frioni and the Perry High School team for supporting our ability to tell their stories, and hopefully we've told them well. There are a few caveats I want to give before I begin the discussion of these stories. Right, there are good things happening in isolation every day across every school. The schools we chose, just like the ones we chose last year, are works in progress, and they would be the first to admit that. Each school has its own context, whether it be the leaders, the teachers, students, families, and community supports. And when we want schools to learn from each other, any lesson learned will have to be adapted for each school's different context. And finally, these stories are no substitute for deeper research into why their practices are getting results that we see. So those of you that are education researchers on this call, we hope that these serve as a starting point for discussions around what's working and what isn't, and a deeper dive into understanding what's happening in these schools. So I want to just take a step back and say, why are we focusing on bright spots? Well, they help us understand the how of good schools, right? They show us replicable practices that are driven, that drive results that we want to see, that are focused on specific problems and really show a solution. And sometimes they're innovative, right? Sometimes they're not. Sometimes they're about doing things well that we know to do. But in showing how to do that, other schools can emulate them. So let's look at one of these bright spots right now. So we recognize that there's a challenge if you go back to the slide in your mind around the outcomes and the results and the gaps in student achievement that we hopefully showed were in large part due to gaps in opportunities that have been structural within our society for many years. It would seem then that those structural disadvantages would lead to results that we would be unable to fix. Well, at one school, Colfax, and we're going to be able to hear from Dr. Tamara Sanders Woods shortly, they've grown third grade reading proficiency and fourth and fifth grade for that matter as well, from 35% in 2015 to 63% in 2019. And we noticed this last year, but we weren't able to sit down and talk with Dr. Sanders Woods and her team until this year to find out how they're doing it. And what we learned when we dug in deeper, right, was that in many ways, the teachers and students are kind of owning what's happening in school and in their learning, right? The high expectations that they've set for their students are matched with high levels of support. So the promise that they're saying, it's not just that they're saying, we want you to be able to read well with fluency and proficiency and understand all that you're reading by third grade, fourth grade, and fifth grade. It's that they're also matching that with supports, right? The school's racial, economic, and language diversity is viewed as a resource and a strength, and teachers are creating a safe environment for all students to share their views and to learn from one another, right? And so the peer-to-peer support is a big part of how they provide extra help to students throughout their learning journey. And then as students are recognized when they master skills, right, they're being told what is it that they need to master, what knowledge do they need to have, and when they master it, they're recognized, they're celebrated, and that helps them to take responsibility for their own learning and understand what else they need to know as they move forward. So I'm looking forward, and you'll hear from her shortly, to learn more about this as well from Dr. Tamara Sanders Woods. But this is the kind of thing that other schools can emulate, right? The peer-to-peer supports, the kind of making clear the academic outcomes, and we hope that learn from her example. We also know that schools can accelerate academic growth and create a culture where students belong. Last year, we highlighted our 6 to 8 as a high growth school, but we also noted in the research in 2019 that Southbrook is more than worth of learning, years worth of time for students, right? And that's what we mean by exceeded the standard, right? And we wanted to know why, right? And what lies at the Southbrook story, really authenticity, deep caring, and strong relationships. And at Southbrook, they're building a culture that supports achievement by adults showing up and being encouraged to bring their authentic selves to school, right? So part and parcel of creating culturally responsive teaching on some level is also about recognizing who you are and being comfortable in your own skin. It starts with authentic relationship building. And the principal and leader at that building really promotes honesty and open dialogue at all levels. So student to student, teacher to teacher, teacher to administrator. Teachers are encouraged to seek out multiple perspectives and show students that their views are valued. You see parallels, right, to Colfax. And teacher and staff make efforts to know students and individuals by providing many little niches where they belong. As Ms. McNamara said, some kids will schools culture, but a lot of the kids to feel like they're part of the school. They need to feel that they're included to reach their fullest potential academically. And so as you read the story in Southbrook in the book, you'll see the ways in which they create opportunities for all students to belong, which is then driving their ability to meet students to grow academically greater than 1 year in a year's worth of time. We also know Pittsburgh is unique as an urban school system in providing early childhood education to students. And what's been fascinating to learn in digging deeper into the early childhood education program is just how we're able to give all students a great PPS is providing early childhood programs that provide a strong developmental foundation that prepares all children, regardless of race or socioeconomic status, for kindergarten. So we want to know how they're doing it. This quote, "Then there's joy," sort of embodied for me the approach that our early childhood educators are taking, right? Children are learning by observing phenomena, testing objects to see what they'll do, using materials to create new things, and acting out what they imagine with whatever is at hand. They do that in a structured environment where teachers are constantly and keeping them engaged in a variety of activities through song, through play. And what's been interesting about this, we're seeing little to no gaps in student achievement in these younger grades. The district is trying to pilot in real ways through the Imagine PPS process the lessons learned in early childhood to extend to K and to education. There's still lots to learn about how those strengths can translate to the older grades, but we're excited to see what happens as it happens through different schools. Beechwood, which we recognized last year, is one of the pilot schools working to kind of integrate early childhood practices into kindergarten, first and second grade. So that's a lot. And I just wanted to stop and just summarize kind of some of the key takeaways, right? Since the system, again, is designed to get the outcomes it gets. Neighborhood enrollment lines, housing red lines, creating highly segregated schools. And if they don't mimic them, what we see is that folks make choices leading to enrollment declines, spreading existing resources more thinly. This poses a significant challenge. We see these gaps in gifted identification, early differences in chronic absence, suspension, rest, that really create a two system of education by high school, our schools. One, our system is trying to address, but one that we have to wrestle with if we're going to actually make change. And then we see high school enrollment criteria further creating separation with high concentrations of students in poverty in a few schools that see further declining enrollment, leading to less opportunities for the children in those schools. Yet with that, in the context, we're still schools and programs that are pointing the way for how to improve, right? Colfax has matched high expectations with high supports to successfully improve 3rd through 5th grade reading. Catching a typo now. I apologize to my teachers out there for the typo. Southbrook creates a culture of belonging where relationships help drive academic growth. The early childhood program within Pittsburgh Public Schools prepares all children for kindergarten, and its strengths are being applied to K-2 in some schools. And Imagine PPS is bringing in community to work with educators at schools like Perry Traditional Academy to address challenges and create new opportunities. So with that, I want to introduce Dr. Tamara Sanders-Wood, the principal of Colfax Pre-K to 8, to talk a little bit more about the program at their schools and just to thank her for the work she's doing. Dr. Tamara Sanders-Woods.
Thank you for the invitation. I first want to congratulate every one of my colleagues and in realizing that although Colfax has done some great things, Pittsburgh Public as a whole, a lot of the schools are doing great things. As you said, each one of us in each school in each setting brings different challenges. But I will first begin with Colfax is very unique. And I think when I got there, I had a different idea of what Colfax was, right? Because I looked at the data, the numbers, I always say. And when I looked at that, before I even interviewed, I saw that, wow, these kids are doing great here, right? But then once I got there and took a deeper look, I saw that our white students were outperforming district-wide, right? We saw the scores appear. We were exceeding the scores throughout the district for white students, but the little dirty secret was that our Black students were doing the worst in the entire district. So I am such a qualitative person. It's in my genes. So I had to start looking at not the numbers, but then the kids, right? So when you stop looking at numbers and start looking at these represent people, these represent kids, you begin to differentiate, right? What does that individual teacher, what does that individual student need to grow? Because it's not just the kids here. And so that's why it was a lot of trust with staff, you know, that wasn't there when I got there. So we had to build a relationship with administration and staff. We did that by book studies. We had to face some systematic things, race things, and I thought your CAST definition was interesting because it named everything but race, right? Because that's a big part of it as well. So we had to take a deeper look into ourselves as teachers, ourselves as administrators, and then we had to look at most Black students are relational learners. So I had the advantage, I was a Black student, I still am a Black student, right, of life. So what did I need as a Black little girl in school? How did I succeed? So I looked at, I had most success out of teachers that I felt I had a genuine relationship. I wanted to do well for them and I allowed them and I received the information that they were teaching me. So that's why I turned it into, it's not an achievement gap, because when you say achievement gap, all that weight falls on a student. When you say opportunity gap, we all have our hands in what is happening here. Why are we seeing this here? And I will say, and I know most people will disagree, Colfax is a different beast of its own because I have to also challenge my students that are here because they did a challenge too. But then the gap was so great, we have to give our attention everywhere. The differentiation of learning at Colfax is so great because you have a room of 27 students all on different levels. So you may be a 5th grade teacher with a student who is seeing, you know, on an 8th grade reading level and one that's on a 2nd grade reading level. So when I go back to building the relationship, right? Our kids are relational learners. Then we start looking at, then we had to look at the numbers, right? So, but you look at people simultaneously. What does little Jimmy need? What are we showing him? So then we started to having everybody look at the data, but not only look at it, what does this mean to not meet this standard? So we began getting the kids to understand their data and what they needed to go above in this standard or to master this standard. And by doing that, we started data talks with the kids. So it wasn't just a bar graph of where they are. That bar graph represented, okay, I'm not meeting this standard. So what do I need to do? What additional resources do I need to help me practice with this? Then we start doing, they had already established lunch bunch there, but then we utilized the adults that we had, right? So when you are on a duty period, you may have these particular group of kids, right? And they're working on these particular standards. And then the lunch bunch grew. So teachers made resource centers within their classrooms so that kids knew, I've not met this standard. I'm going to come up at lunch with this particular student who has mastered that standard, and we're going to work together, because we also know that kids learn from each other. So there were a lot of different things that we had to look at. And we started that going from the top all the way down, of having kids talk about their data. So when you come to Colfax, a kid will know, where are you in reading? And if you are you're accelerated, they can tell you what they go to. If they're moving ahead, some students can tell you what particular standard they didn't meet and what they're working on during spare time, during lunchtime, to meet that standard. We also have a unique thing that I'm telling you, when I got to Pittsburgh Public, it was like I went through a college level, another degree, right? Because I did learn so much there. So we also had to talk about, English language learner students, right? And not only that, we have to talk about how we're communicating with the different parents so that they're active participants. So at Colfax, again, we have to communicate 3 different ways, right? A lot of translation things. We do the remind so that we get a text message right away. We were doing that way before. Each teacher is responsible for a syllabus and or a newsletter, so that parents have that as well. So it was just a combination of things that we were doing once we realized the hot spots of those areas. But number one being, I was a Black student. I'm a Black learner. So our deficit was in Black students. So I had the advantage of knowing, for me, qualitatively speaking, what did I need as a student sitting in a classroom? And I was always in classrooms where I was the only Black student, right? So even, I heard you talking about how we hire African-American educators. So even in that, right, when I was there was only one African-American teacher there. So now at Colfax, there's probably about 10 African-American teachers, 1 social worker, and I stopped counting. And why I stopped counting is because I didn't need to count when I began to go from room to room or floor to floor and see the staff represented more of the student population, because that does matter too. Black children also need to see that there are Black teachers, right? Social workers, principals. White students need to see that too, right? Or ELL students need to see that, because it should be a reflection of, and it's not just getting those employees in your building. You got to understand that systematic doesn't stop once we get a degree. You got to support those people once you get them, so that they can grow and so that they want to stay and so that they become better. I was in many situations where I was the only, Black professional in the building that I didn't feel supported, that I felt alone, that I felt isolated. So can you imagine that at this age, I should be able to advocate for myself, but children and teachers who are in those spaces, right? And so they're fighting systematic things while trying to advocate for best practices of students who we are seeing needing that because of the opportunity gaps that we see throughout Pittsburgh and throughout the suburbs as well. But it's mainly highlighted in Pittsburgh. But I would say and stand on what I see happening in Pittsburgh is we are far greater than what I have seen in some of our suburban neighborhood schools, and what we are attempting to do, the progress. I will speak for me in Colfax, what I see in my teachers and the team there. I am always amazed at some of the things that my teachers and our team is willing to do for each individual student. Again, we look at each individual, those numbers represent kids to us. What does that particular kid need? What do we need to do to meet that kid's need? Because differentiation is not in the classroom. Differentiation is the moment that that child is enrolled at Colfax. Do we know that they're eating breakfast? Do we know how they got to school? Do we know why they're late to school? What can we do to accommodate that when they're late, they're not missing the most important part of their day, eating breakfast, or first period is reading. Sometimes you got to differentiate even before that kid steps in front of you.
I Can't thank you enough for all the work you're doing, Dr. Sanders Woods. And thank you for taking the time with Faith and Gita and allowing us to come into your school and interview folks in a year that is unlike any other. So I can't imagine how hard this is not to have your students in your building with you. But I thank you really for all the work you're doing. And I hope that the lessons that you're learning at Colfax are being shared more broadly at the district. I know there's a lot of professional learning communities and within the district and sharing of information and resources across principals. So appreciate all you're doing, and thank you so much for being here today and sharing your insights with us and the press and the audience at large here. Thanks.
Oh, thank you.
I am now going to hand it over to Ms. Nina Esposito-Viscaitis, the president of the Pittsburgh Federation of Teachers, for some reflections on what we've presented today. Nina, are you there?
Yes. Yes. Hi, James. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thank you for joining us today.
Oh, I've totally enjoyed listening. Thank you so very much. And I want to thank A+ Schools for reminding us of the great things going on in Pittsburgh Public Schools, even in this really difficult year. So this has been very uplifting. I've got to tell you, I always enjoy listening to the report, and it's been extra enjoyable this year because this could be a year you could really focus on the negatives with everything going on. So this has been terrific. So thank you very much. And thank you for adding so many great things, especially the CTE information. I'm a big proponent of CTE, so I'm very excited to see that addition. I'm very excited about that. I'm very fortunate because I get to be immersed in all the great things going on in the Pittsburgh Public Schools. So I get to see all of this. So it's wonderful to see it highlighted here, as well as the things I know we have to work on, and there are plenty, and we know we have to work on it, and we're excited about those too, because you have to be aware of it to know you have to work on them. But this year, more than ever, we have faced challenges, as everyone else has, but it has been, we have to also focus on what we have learned, and we have learned a lot this year, and there have been positives, including, and you have focused on a lot of them here, and I thank you, and I won't belabor the things you've talked about, but it has been good to see the appreciation for teachers, even from the late night talk show host, who have reiterated that teaching really is rocket science, and I really do appreciate that. But I have appreciated more than ever, I've seen teachers and parents working together in so many ways, and I've got to tell you, the collaboration, and kudos to parents who have really stepped up to work with their students, and they are to be commended. I have seen over and over beautiful collaborations, and that's great. And I want them to continue, and I think you see it in your report, and I think it's wonderful. And I think you see it, and I want to call out, and you have called out, collaboration is so important, and you see it in schools like Southbrook, and you've mentioned Beechwood. The collaborations must continue, and they are so rich in schools like those, and they really help kids when you build the relationships from the top down, when you have fantastic principals like you do there. It works between the teachers and the principals, and the kids feel it also, and it makes the school work. And I really do want to commend principals like those working with the kids and working with the teachers. And it is a beautiful, beautiful thing to watch. So that is wonderful. And we need more collaboration like that. And it goes right through. And I want to commend the teachers and parents who have pivoted from working in school, out of school. There has been a lot of that this year, but they have done everything they can to make it work. And they have turned their homes into absolutely beautiful classrooms. It's been a joy to watch them work. Teachers that have gone to students' home who have not gotten connectivity, and they have gone into the homes and worked with students, and they've kept track of their students. I've got to tell you that. They have told me when I've reported that, oh yeah, all the kids have computers, and they've written to me, oh no, Nina, I can tell you 3 kids in my school classroom that don't. And I have just the partnerships and the relationships, I think, are stronger than ever. So if there is an upside to this very difficult year, I think we have made stronger relationships than ever before. So I'm excited about what we've learned, and I think we will continue to learn. I think more than ever we're using technology, and I think that will stay with us. I think we all know about Zoom more than ever, but I think it'll stick with us, and I think we've learned some great things, and we're going to use it in a lot of what James was talking about. I think we've exposed the inequities more than ever, and I think we will not accept, I don't think we ever have, but I think more than ever we're definitely not accepting them. We've exposed them more, and they're not going back in, and we are going to continue to work on them, and we've made more unlikely partnerships, and I think that's great. I think it's great because we have said, if we're going to work together, we haven't worked together in the past, but we're going to work together for the good of our kids. And I think it's good to see people excited about it. With the new administration, with some of what we've learned, and with this excellent report, I think every year the report gets better, more complete. It teaches us more, and I thank A+ and you, James, for making it positive. And I look forward to working with you to do some great things for our kids. Thank you very much, James.
Thanks.
I look forward to working with you and some new partners. I look forward to it.
Yeah, thank you very much. We appreciate you and your leadership of our teachers, and to all the teachers out there who we know are doing their best in trying times. I want to hand it off now to Ms. Monica Jenkins, the Chief Academic Officer of Pittsburgh Public Schools, for some of her reflections. Monica, are you there?
I am. Thank you so much, James Fogarty. I appreciate the opportunity on behalf of Dr. Hamlet and Pittsburgh Public Schools to be a part of the session today. As you stated, the system-wide improvement is not easy, and I really appreciate you highlighting some of the systemic issues that have not only plagued our minority students, specifically African Americans, with regards to gifted identification, advanced placement exposure, IB exposure, International Baccalaureate, not only in PPS, but across the nation. I think that's important, and I really, really appreciate you highlighting our bright spots. Oftentimes, we hear of the challenges that we face, but focusing on our bright spots allows us to continue to identify where we need to focus and get some of those ideas and really be able to improve our system. I really, really think and thank you for focusing not just on the institution, but focusing on a community-based approach. Our community voice is very powerful and important, and it is really what is necessary to support our students. This will help us to what Ms. Principal Sanders Wood so eloquently described as minimizing the opportunity gap, because that is really what our students have. And PPS Imagine is really about focusing on making sure that those opportunities exist for all of our students across the entire district. So in other words, regardless of zip code, our students can have those experiences that are happening in many of our schools. When we think about the ground laying work, Imagine PPS starts that process, but the help and the support and the groundwork actually begins in our schools. And so I appreciate again that you allowed Principal Sanders Woods, and you highlighted some of our CTE programs and several others in what they're doing. When I think about our building leaders and our teachers, and when I say building leaders, I'm referring to principals and assistant principals, but then our teachers who are boots on the ground supporting our students. They are the ones that are going to help really make sure that that opportunity gap it's there and it does not exist for our students. And we really want to make sure we address that. So thank you so much for the opportunity to see the report. I think the idea of the community-based approach is phenomenal. And I do appreciate focusing on the bright spots because that is important, and we are PPS strong. Thank you so much.
Hey, thank you, Ms. Jenkins. We really appreciate you being here and joining us, and for all the work that you all are doing. Look, we know that this is, we're facing unprecedented challenges, and that the systems that we have within our schools and other places need to be fundamentally redesigned and rethought. And that this community really is stepping up to that task. I can't say, I can't speak enough about the relationships that have been forged in the past 8 months with different organizations, with folks at the district, with people in different schools, to really try and address the needs of our children and families. We have, and I'll say this again in my I'll say this now so I don't have to belabor it in my closing remarks, but in my mind, we have everything we need to be successful by our children and by the families that we have in the system. It just is, are we willing to take a risk, to build trust, to highlight what's good and what's working, and to learn from that to move forward, rather than facing each other with recriminations or blame. There's a lot of work to be done. And it's going to take all of us rolling up our sleeves to get it done. And so I'm asking you as a member of the public, if you're online with us today, to do a couple things. One, read the report online or in print. Print versions will be sent to every PPS household today. They're dropping in the mail today, so they will be in your mailboxes tomorrow and throughout the week. Next week, if your organization, if your church group, community development organization, a citywide organization, Rotary Club, you can schedule a virtual presentation tailored to your school or community group. All you need to do is reach out to our offices, and the links to that on how to do that will be at ourschoolspittsburgh.org. The other thing you can do at ourschoolspittsburgh.org is share your stories. We want to know what's working, what challenges you're facing, and what you'd like to see change. If typing that up at ourschoolspittsburgh.org doesn't work, you can always use our family hotline. Links to that are actually at the website, ourschoolspittsburgh.org, and we appreciate you taking a look. So those are the things that you can do today. We know that there are larger conversations that need to happen about addressing these systemic inequities, and they're happening at our school board. So we encourage you, get involved in school board races that are going to be coming up in the spring. Get to know your school board member, let them know the challenges you're facing, what's working in your schools. Share that with us, and we'll share it back out to them as well. You'll see here on this slide a picture of the website. This will go live here just after we close. So with that, I want to open it up to questions from the press or from the audience. I know I'll be speaking with some members of the press later today, but if there are folks that have questions now that they'd like to ask that we could try and answer for you, please feel free to raise your hand in the chat, and Graham will, who's been dutifully helping us monitor and manage this call, we'll let you in. And please do make it a question, not a statement. We want folks to be able to have time, and we'll do this for about 10 minutes. And then if you have additional questions, you can feel free to reach out to me via email or by phone at 412-697-1298, extension 100. So with that, I'll open it up. Graham? This is always the awkward part of Zoom calls, that moment when you're going to speak before 100 people that you can't see.
I'm not seeing any, but if anyone wants to put it in the chat, we can get it up.
All right. Thanks, Graham. And look, there was a lot. I know there was a lot in an hour for you to digest. So if you need a minute, totally understand. What we'll do is I'll stay on. I'll thank all of the participants. Thank you to my board at A+ Schools, to Sarah for your leadership of the board, to the school board for what you're trying, what you're working through in very difficult times, to the administrators, teachers, staff, and especially to our children and families. This has been a challenge. It continues to be a challenge. And I think, as Nina pointed out, we didn't want to spend our time focusing on the challenges we know, but rather focusing on those that have been solving them in the past, with the hopes that their lessons learned can drive us towards better in the future. So as I said, if folks want to drop off, feel free. I will remain on for a couple more minutes. And then if after that you need to get in touch with me, feel free to reach out through ourschoolspittsburgh.org or via phone or email. Thank you, everyone.